Bilbo is at it again. Hello everybody, my name is Kevin George. I'm the rector of St. Aidan's Church, and I'm really glad that you've tuned in to Friday Nights with Bilbo Baggins. Each week, the young people of our parish have been reading for us another chapter of C.S. Lewis's classic, The Hobbit. This week, they are reading to us about queer lodgings, and our readers will be Kate and Naomi. And here, we're in our own misty mountain, our own area of Middle Earth, is our own queer lodging. This is a foxhole, like a real foxhole, not like the war foxholes. But this is, in here is a mother fox and her kids. And we see her out here. She was out earlier today. And I thought, if we're going to talk about queer lodgings, let's talk about this queer lodging. Anyway, we're glad that you've tuned in. I'm so thankful to you parents and to the kids who are reading for making this happen, picking up cameras and dropping them off and getting the video back to us. I can't wait to listen to these two great readers take us on the next step. Now we're halfway through this wonderful book, and then I'll be back to say hello to you at the end of the reading. Oh, to travel with Bilbo into these magical lands.
Queer Lodgings. The next morning, Bilbo woke up with the early sun in his eyes. He jumped up to look at the time and to go put his kettle on, and found he was not home at all. So he sat down and wished in vain for a wash and a brush. He did not get either, nor tea, nor toast, nor bacon for his breakfast, only cold mutton and rabbit, and after that he had to get ready for a fresh start. This time he was allowed to climb onto an eagle's back and cling between his wings. The air rushed over him, and he shut his eyes. The doors were crying farewells and promising to repay the Lord of the Eagles, if ever they could, as off rose 15 great birds from the mountain's side. The sun was still close to the eastern edge of things. The morning was cool, and mists were in the valleys and hollows, and twined here and there above the peaks and pinnacles of the hills. Bilbo opened an eye to peep, and saw that the birds were already high up, and the world was far away, and the mountains were falling back behind them into the distance. He shut his eyes again, and held on tighter. "Don't pinch," said his eagle. "You need not be frightened like a rabbit, even if you look rather like one. It is a fair morning, with little wind. What is finer than flying?" Bilbo would have liked to say, "A warm bath and late breakfast on the lawn afterwards," but he thought it better to say nothing at all, and to let go his clutch just a tiny bit. After a good while, the eagles must have seen the point they were making for, even from their great height, for they began to go down, circling round in great spirals. They did this for a long while, and at last the hobbit opened his eyes again. The earth was much nearer, and below them were trees that looked like oaks and elms, and wide grasslands, and a river running through it all. But cropping out of the ground, right in the path of the stream, which loops itself about it, was a great rock. Almost a hill of stone, like a last outpost of the distant mountains, or a huge piece cast miles into the plain by some giant among giants. Quickly now, to the top of this rock, the eagles swooped one by one, and set down their passengers. "Farewell," they cried, wherever you fare till your eyes receive you at journey's end." That is the polite thing to say among eagles. "May the wind under your wings bear you where the sun sails and the moon walks," answered Gandalf, who knew the correct reply. And so they parted. And though the Lord of the Eagles became in after days the king of all birds, and wore a golden crown and his 15 chieftain gold collars, made of the gold that the dwarves gave them, Bilbo never saw them again, except high and far off in the Battle of 5 Armies. But as that comes in the end of this tale, we will say no more about it just now. There was a flat space on the top of the hill of stone, and a well-worn path with many steps leading down it to the river, across which a ford of huge flat stones led to the grasslands beyond the stream. There was a little cave, a wholesome one with a pebbly floor, at the foot of the steps, and near the end of the stony ford. Here the party gathered and discussed what was to be done. "I always meant to see you all safe, if possible, over the mountains," said the wizard, "and now, by good management and good luck, I have done it. Indeed, we are all now a good deal further east than I ever meant to come with you. For after all, this is not my adventure. I may look in on it again before it is all over, but in the meantime I have some other pressing business to attend to. The dwarves groaned and looked most distressed, and Bilbo wept. They had begun to think that Gandalf was going to come all the way and would always be there to help them out of the difficulties. "I am not going to disappear this very instant," he said. "I can give you a day or two more. Probably I can help you out of your present plight, and I need a little help myself. We have no food, no baggage, and no ponies to ride, and you don't know where you are. Now, I can tell you that. You are still some miles north of the path which we should have been following if we had not left the mountain pass in a hurry. Very few people live in these parts, unless they have come here since I was last down this way, which was some years ago. But there is somebody that I know of who lives not far away from here. That somebody made these steps on the great rock, the Kerrock, I believe he calls it. He does not come here often, certainly not in the daytime, and it is no good waiting for him. In fact, it would be very dangerous. We must go and find him, and if all goes well at our meeting, I think I shall be off, and wish you like the eagle's farewell wherever you fare." They begged him not to leave. They offered him dragon's gold and silver and jewels, but he would not change his mind. We shall see," he said. "And I think I have earned already some of your dragon's gold, when you have got it." After that they stopped pleading. Then they took off their clothes and bathed in the river, which was shallow and clear and stony at the ford. When they had dried in the sun, which was now strong and warm, they were refreshed, if still sore and a little hungry. Soon they crossed the ford, carrying the hobbit, and then began to march through the long green grass and down the lines of wide-armed oaks and tall elms. "And why is it called Kerrock?" asked Bilbo, as he went along the wizard's side. "He called it Kerrock because Kerrock is his word for it. He calls things like that Kerrock, and this one is the Kerrock, because it is the only one near his home, and he knows it well." "Who calls it? Who knows it?" "That somebody I spoke of, a very great person. You must all be very polite when I introduce you. I shall introduce you slowly, 2 by 2, I think, and you must be careful not to annoy him, or heavens knows what will happen. He can be appalling when he is angry, though he is kind enough if humored. Still, I warn you, he can get angry easily." The dwarves all gathered round when they heard the wizard talking like this to Bilbo. "Is that the person you were taking us to now?" they asked. "Couldn't you find someone more easy-tempered? Hadn't you better explain it all a bit clearer?" And so on. "Yes, it certainly is. No, I could not. I was explaining very carefully," answered the wizard crossly. "If you must know more, his name is Bjorn. He is very strong, and he is a skin-changer." "What? A furrier? A man who calls rabbits conies when he doesn't turn their skins into squirrels?" asked Bilbo. "Good gracious heavens, no, 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 no," said Gandalf. "Don't be a fool, Mr. Baggins, if you can help it. And in all the name of wonder, don't mention the word furrier again, as long as you are within hundreds of miles of his house. Nor rug, cape, tippet, muff, nor any such unfortunate word. He's a skin-changer. He changes his skin. Sometimes he's a huge black bear. Sometimes he's a great, strong, black-haired man with huge arms and a great beard. I cannot tell you much more, though that ought to be enough. Some say that he is a bear descended from the great ancient bears of the mountains that lived before the giants came. Others say he is a man descended from the first men who lived before Smaug, or the other dragons, came to this part of the world, and before the goblins came into the hills of the north. I cannot say, though I fancy the last is a true tale. He is not the sort of person to ask questions of. At any rate, he is under no enchantment but his own. He lives in an oak wood and has a great wooden house. And as a man, he keeps cattle and horses, which are nearly as marvelous as himself. They work for him and talk to him, He does not eat them. Neither does he hunt or eat wild animals. He keeps hives and hives of great, fierce bees, and lives mostly on cream and honey. As a bear, he ranges far and wide. I once saw him sitting all alone at the top of the Kerrock at night, watching the moon sinking towards the misty mountains, and I heard him growl in the tongue of bears, "The day will come when they will perish, and I shall go back." That is why I believe he once came from the mountains himself. Bilbo and the dwarves had now plenty to think about, and they asked no more questions. They still had a long way to walk before them. Up slope and down dale they plodded. It grew very hot. Sometimes they rested under the trees, and then Bilbo felt so hungry that he would have eaten acorns, if any had been ripe enough yet to have fallen to the ground. It was the middle of the afternoon before they noticed the great patches of wildflowers that had begun to spring up, all the same kinds growing together as if they had been planted, especially there was clover, waving patches of cockscomb clover, and purple clover, and wide stretches of short, white, sweet, honey-smelling clover. There was a buzzing and a whirring and a droning in the air. Bees were busy everywhere. And such bees! Bilbo had never seen anything like them. If one was to sting me, he thought, I should swell up as big as I am. They were bigger than hornets. The drones were bigger than your thumb, and a good deal, as the bands of yellow on their deep black bodies shone like a fiery gold. "We are getting near," said Gandalf. "We are on the edge of his bee pastures." After a while, they came to a belt of tall and very ancient oaks, and beyond those to a high thorn hedge, through which you could neither see nor scramble. "You had better wait here," said the wizard to the dwarves, "and when I call or whistle to come after me, you will see the way I go. But only in pairs, mind, about 5 minutes between each pair of you. Bombur is fattest, so he will do for 2. He had better come alone and last. Come on, Mr. Baggins. There is a gate somewhere round this way." And with that he went off to the hedge, taking the frightened hobbit with him. They soon came to a wooden gate, high and broad. Beyond they could see gardens and a cluster of low wooden buildings, some thatched and made of unshaped logs, barns, stables, sheds, and a long, low wooden house. Inside, on the southward side of the great hedge, were rows and rows of hives, with bell-shaped tops made of straw. The noise of the giant bees flying to and fro and crawling in and out filled the air. The wizard and the hobbit pushed open the heavy creaking gate and went down a wide track towards the house. Some horses, very sleek and well-groomed, trotted up across the grass and looked at them intently with intelligent faces. Then off they galloped to the buildings. "They've gone to tell him of the arrival of strangers," said Gandalf. Soon they reached a courtyard, 3 walls of which were formed by the wooden house and its 2 long wings. In the middle there was lying a great oak trunk with many looped branches inside. Standing near the great oak trunk, standing near was a huge man with a thick black beard and hair, and great bare arms and legs with knotted muscles. He was clothed in a tunic of wool down to the knees, and he was leaning on a large axe. The horses were standing by him, with their nose on his shoulder. "Oh, here they are," he said to the horses. They don't look dangerous. You can be off." He laughed, a great rolling laugh, put down his axe, and came forward. "Who are you, and what do you want?" he asked gruffly, standing in front of them and towering tall above Gandalf. As for Bilbo, he could easily have trotted through his legs without ducking his head to miss the fringe of the man's brown tunic. "I am Gandalf," said the wizard. "Never heard of him," growled the man. "And what's this little fellow?" he said, stooping down to frown at the hobbit with his bushy black eyebrows. "That is Mr. Baggins, a hobbit of good family, An unimpeachable reputation, said Gandalf. Bilbo bowed. He had no hat to take off, and was painfully conscious of his many missing buttons. I am a wizard, continued Gandalf. I have heard of you, if you have not heard of me. But perhaps you have heard of my good cousin Radagast, who lives near the southern borders of Mirkwood. Yes, not a bad fellow as wizards go, I believe. I used to see him now and again, said Bjorn. Well now, I know who you are, or who you say you are. What do you want? To tell you the truth, we have lost our luggage and nearly lost our way, and we are rather in need of help, or at least of advice. I may say we have some rather bad times with goblins in the mountains. Goblins, said the big man less gruffly. Oh ho, so you've been having trouble with them, have you? What did you go near them for? We did not mean to. They surprised us at night in a pass, which we had to cross. We were coming out of the lands over west in these countries. It is a long tale. Then you had better come inside and tell me some of it, if it won't take all day, said the man, leading the way through the dark door that opened in the courtyard into the house. That opened out of the courtyard into the house. Following him, they found themselves in a wide hall with a fireplace in the middle. Though it was summer, there was a wood fire burning, and the smoke was rising to the blackened rafters in search of a way out through the opening in the roof. They passed through this dim hall, lit only by fire and the hole above it, and came through another, smaller door into a sort of lair propped on wooden posts made of single tree trunks. It faced south and was still warm, and filled with light of the western sun, which slanted into it and fell golden on the garden full of flowers that came right up to the steps. Here they sat on wooden benches while Gandalf began his tale, and Bilbo swung his dangling legs and looked at the flowers in the garden, wondering what their names could be, as if he had never seen half of them before. I was coming over the mountains with a friend or two, said the wizard. Or two? I can only see one, and a little one at that, said Bjorn. Well, to tell you the truth, I did not like to bother you with a lot of us, until I found out you were busy. We will give a call, if I may. Go on, call away. So Gandalf gave a long, shrill whistle, and presently Thorin and Dori came round the house by the garden path and stood bowing low before them. One of three you meant, I see, said Bjorn. But these aren't hobbits, they're dwarves. Thorin Oakenshield at your service, Dori at your service, said the two dwarves, bowing again. I don't need your service, thank you, said Bjorn, but I expect you need mine. I am not over fond of dwarves, but if it is true that you are Thorin, son of Thrain, son of Thror, son of Thoror, I believe, and that your companion is respectable, and that you are enemies of goblins and are not up to any mischief in my lands. What are you up to, by the way? They are on their way to visit the land of their fathers, the way east beyond Mirkwood, put in Gandalf, and it is entirely an accident that they are in your lands at all. We were crossing by the high pass that should have brought us to the road that lies in the south of your country, when we were attacked by the evil goblins. I was about to tell you. Go on telling, then, said Bjorn, who had never been polite. There was a terrible storm. The stone giants were out hurling rocks, and at the head of the pass we took refuge in a cave, the hobbits and I, several of our companions. Do you call two several? Well, no. As a matter of fact, there were more than two. Where are they? Killed? Eaten? Gone home? Well, no, they don't seem all to have come when I whistled. Shy, I expect. You see, we are very much afraid that we are rather a lot for you to entertain. Go on, whistle again. I'm in for a party, it seems. And one or two won't make much difference, growled Bjorn. Gandalf whistled again, but Nori and Ori were there almost before he had stopped. For, if you remember, Gandalf had told them to come in pairs every 5 minutes. "Hello," said Bjorn. "You came pretty quick. What were you hiding?" "Come on, my jack-in-the-boxes." "Nori at your service, or yet," they began, but Bjorn interrupted them. "Thank you. When I want your help, I will ask for it. Sit down, and let's get on with this tale, or it will be supper time before it is ended." As soon as we were asleep, went on Gandalf, a crack at the back of the cave opened. Goblins came out and grabbed the hobbit and the dwarves and our troops of ponies. "Troop of ponies? What were you, a traveling circus? Or were you carrying lots of goods? Or do you always call 6 a troop?" "Oh, no. As a matter of fact, there were more than 6 ponies. For there were more than 6 of us. And, well, here are 2 more." Just at that moment, Balin and Dolin appeared and bowed so low that their beards swept on the stone floor. The big man was frowning at first, but they did their best to be frightfully polite and kept on nodding and bending and bowing and waving their hands before their knees in proper dwarf fashion, till he stopped frowning and burst into a chuckling laugh. They looked so comical. "Troop was right," he said. "A fine comic one. Come in, my merry men, and what are your names? I don't want your service just now, just your names, and then sit down and stop wagging." "Balin and Dwalin," they said, not daring to be offended, and sat flop on the floor, looking rather surprised. "Now go on again," said Bjorn to the wizard. "Where was I? Oh, yes. I was not grabbed. I killed a goblin or 2 with a flash." "Good," growled Bjorn. "It is some good being a wizard, then," and slipped inside the crack before it closed. I followed down into the main hall, which was crowded with goblins. The great goblins was there with his 30 or 40 armed guards. I thought to myself, even if they were not all chained together, what can a dozen do against so many? A dozen! That's for the first time I've heard 8 called dozen. Or have you still got some more jacks that you haven't come out of their boxes? "Well, yes, there seem to be a couple more here now. Feely and Keely, I believe," said Gandalf, as these 2 now appeared and stood smiling and bowing. "That's enough," said Bjorn. "Sit down and be quiet. Go on, Gandalf." So Gandalf went on with his tale, until he came to the fight in the dark, and the discovery of the lower gate, and their horror when they found out that Mr. Baggins had been mislaid. We counted ourselves, and found that there was no hobbit. There were only 14 of us left. 14? That's the first time I've heard one from 10 leaves 14. "You mean 9, or else you haven't told me all the names of your party." "Well, of course, you haven't seen Oin and Gloin yet, and bless me, here they are. I hope you'll forgive them for bothering you." "Oh, let 'em all come. Hurry up. Come along, you 2, and sit down. But look here, Gandalf. Even now, you've only got yourself 10 dwarves, and the hobbit that was lost. That only makes 11, plus 1 mislaid, and not 14, unless wizards count differently to other people. But now please get on with your tale." Bjorn did not show it more than he could help, but he really had begun to get very interested. You see, in the old days, he had known the very part of the mountains that Gandalf was describing. He nodded and growled, and when he heard of the hobbits' reappearance, and of their scramble down the stone slide and the wolfing in the woods, when Gandalf came to their climbing into trees with the wolves all underneath, he got up and strode about and muttered, "I wish I had been there. I would have given them more than fireworks." "Well," said Gandalf, very glad to see that his tale was making a good impression, "I did the best I could. There we were, the wolves going bad underneath us, and the forest beginning to blaze in places, when the goblins came down from the hills and discovered us. They yelled with delight and sang songs making fun of us. 15 birds in 5 fir trees. Good heavens, growled Bjorn. Don't pretend that goblins can't count. They can. 12 isn't 15, and they know it. And so do I. There were Biffer and Boffer as well. I haven't ventured to introduce them before, But here they are. In came Biffer and Boffer. "And me," gasped Bomber, puffing up behind. He was fat and also angry at being left till last. He refused to wait 5 minutes and followed immediately after the other two. "Well now, there are 15 of you, and since goblins can count, I suppose that is all there were up those trees. Now perhaps we can finish the story without any more interruptions." Mr. Baggins saw then how clever Gandalf had been. The interruptions had really made Bjorn more interested in the story, and the story had kept him from sending the dwarves off at once, like suspicious beggars. He never invited people into his house, if he could help it. He had very few friends, and they lived a good ways away, and he never invited them more than a couple of these into his house at a time. Now he had 15 strangers sitting on his porch. By the time the wizard had finished his tale and told of the eagle's rescue and of how they had all been brought to the Carrock, the sun had fallen behind the peaks of the misty mountains, and the shadows were long in Bjorn's garden. "A very good tale," he said. "The best I have heard for a long while. If all beggars could tell such a good one, they might find me kinder. You may be making it all up, of course, but you deserve a supper for the story all the same. Let's have something to eat." "Yes, please," they all said together. "Thank you very much." Inside the hall was now quiet and dark. Bjorn clapped his hands, and in trotted 4 beautiful white ponies and several large, long-bodied grey dogs. Bjorn said something to them in a queer language, like animal noises turned into talk. They went out again, and soon came back carrying torches in their mouths, which they lit at a fire and stuck in low brackets on the pillars of the hall about the central hearth. The dogs could stand on their hind legs when they wished and carry things with their forefeet. Quickly they got out boards and trusses from the side walls and set them up near the fire. Then "ba, ba, ba" was heard, and in came some snow-white sheep, led by a large coal-black ram. One bore a white cloth embroidered at the edge with figures of animals. Others bore on their broad backs trays of bowls and platters and knives and wooden spoons, which the dogs took and quickly laid on the trestle tables. These were very low enough for even Bilbo to sit at comfortably. Beside them a pony pushed 2 low seat benches from wide rush bottoms and little short thick legs for Gandalf and Thorin, while at the far end he put Bjorn's big black chair of the same sort, in which he sat with his great legs stuck far out under the table. These were all the chairs he had in his hall, and he probably had them low like the tables for the convenience of the wonderful animals, and waited on him. What did the rest sit on? They were not forgotten. The other ponies came in rolling round drum-shaped sections of logs, smoothed and polished, and low enough, even for Bilbo. So soon they were all seated at Bjorn's table, and the hall was not seen such gathering for many years. There they had supper, or a dinner, such as they had not had since they left the last homely house in the west, and said goodbye to Elrond. The light in the torches and the fire flickered about them, and on the table were 2 tall red beeswax candles. All the time they ate, Bjorn, in his deep rolling voice, told tales of the wild lands on his side of the mountains, and especially of the dark and dangerous wood that lay outstretching far north and south, a day's ride before them, bearing the way to the east, the terrible forest of Mirkwood. The dwarves listened and shook their beards, for they knew that they must soon venture into the forest, and that after the mountain it was the worst of the perils they had to pass before they came to the dragon's stronghold. When dinner was over, they began to tell tales of their own, but Bjorn seemed to be growing drowsy and paid little heed to them. They spoke most of gold and silver and jewels and the making of things by smithcraft, and Bjorn did not appear to care for such things. There were no things of gold or silver in his hall, and few save the knives were made of metal at all. They sat long at the table with their wooden drinking bowls filled with mead. They drank at night. The dark night came on outside. The fires in the middle of the hall were built with fresh logs, and the torches were put out, and still they sat in the light, dancing flames with the pillars of his house standing tall behind them, and dark at the top of the trees of the forest. Whether it was magic or not, it seemed to Bilbo that he heard sounds, like wind in the branches stirring up the rafters, and hoots of owls. Soon he began to nod with sleep, and the voices seemed to grow far away, until he woke with a start. The great door had creaked and slammed. Bjorn was gone. The dwarves were sitting cross-legged on the floor, round the fire, and presently they began to sing. Some of the verses were like this, but there were many more, and their singing went on for a long while.
Clap, snap, the black crack. Grip, grab, pinch, nab. And down, down to Goblin Town you go, my lad. Clash, crash, crush, smash. Hammer and tongs, knocker and gongs. Pound, pound, far underground. Ho, ho, my lad. Swish, smack, whip, crack. Batter and beat, yammer and bleat. Work, work, nor dare to shirk, while goblins quaff and goblins laugh. Round and round, far underground, below, my lad. It sounded truly terrifying. The walls echoed to the clap, snap, and the crush, smash, and to the ugly laughter of their ho, ho, my lad. The general meaning of the song was only too plain, for now the goblins took out whips and whipped them with a swish smack, and set them running as fast as they could in front of them. And more than one of the dwarves were already yammering and bleeding like anything when they stumbled into a big cavern. It was lit by a great red fire in the middle, and by torches along the walls, and it was full of goblins. They all laughed and stamped and clapped their hands when the dwarves, with poor Bilbo at the back and nearest to the whips, came running in, while the goblin drivers whooped and cracked their whips behind. The ponies were already there, huddled in the corner, and there were all the baggages and packages lying broken open and being rummaged by goblins, and smelt by goblins, and fingered by goblins, and quarreled over by goblins. I'm afraid that was the last they ever saw those excellent little ponies, including a jolly, sturdy little white fellow that Elrond had lent to Gandalf, since his horse was not suitable for the mountain paths. For goblins eat horses, and ponies and donkeys, and other much more dreadful things. And they are always hungry. Just now, however, the prisoners were thinking of only themselves. The goblins chained their hands behind their backs and linked them all together in a line, and dragged them to the far end of the cavern, with little Bilbo tugging at the end of the rope. There in the shadows, on a large flat stone, sat a tremendous goblin with a huge head. and armed goblins were standing round him, carrying the axes and the bent swords that they use. Now goblins are cruel, wicked, and bad-hearted. They make no beautiful things, but they make many clever ones. They can tunnel and mine as well as any, but the most skilled dwarves, when they take the trouble, though they are usually untidy and dirty, hammers, axes, swords, daggers, pickaxes, tongs, and also instruments of torture, they make very well, or get other people to make to their design, prisoners and slaves that have to work till they die for want of air and light. It is not likely that they invented some of the machines that have since troubled the world, especially the ingenious devices for killing large numbers of people at once, for wheels and engines and explosions always delight them, and also not working with their own hands more than they could help. But in those days and those wild parts, they had not advanced, as it is called, so far. They did not hate dwarves especially, no more than they hated everybody and everything, and particularly the orderly and prosperous. In some parts, wicked dwarves and had even made alliances with them, but they had a special grudge against Thorin's people because of the war which you have heard mentioned, but which does not come into this tale. And anyway, goblins don't care who they catch, as long as it is done smart and secret, and the prisoners are not able to defend themselves. "Who are these miserable persons?" said the great goblin. "Dwarves, and this," said one of the drivers, pulling at Bilbo's chain so that he fell forward on his knees. "We found them sheltering in our front porch." "What do you mean by it?" said the great goblin, turning to Thorin. "Up to no good, I'll warrant. Spying on the private business of my people, I guess. Thieves, I shouldn't be surprised to learn. Murderers and friends of elves, not unlikely. Come, what have you got to say?" "Thorin, the dwarf at your service," he replied. "It was merely a polite nothing. Of the things which you suspect and imagine, we had no idea at all. We sheltered from a storm in what seemed a convenient cave and unused. Nothing was further from our thoughts than insignificant goblins in any way whatever. That was true enough." Said the great goblin, "So you say. Might I ask what you were doing up in the mountains at all, and where you were coming from, and where you were going to? In fact, I should like to know all about you. Not that it will do good for you much good, Thorin Oakenshield. I know too much about your folk already. But let's have the truth, or I will prepare something particularly uncomfortable for you." "We were on a journey to visit our relatives, our nephews and nieces, and first, second, and third cousins, and the other descendants of our grandfathers, who live on the east side of these truly hospitable mountains," said Thorin, not quite knowing what to say at all. not knowing what to say all at once in a moment, when obviously the exact truth would not do at all. He is a liar. Oh, truly tremendous one, said one of the drivers. Several of our people were struck by lightning in the cave when we invited these creatures to come below, and they are as dead as stones. And he has not explained this. He held out the sword which Thorin had worn, the sword which came from the troll's lair. The great goblin gave a truly awful howl of rage when he looked at it, and all his soldiers gnashed their teeth, clashed their shields, and stamped. They knew the sword at once. It had killed hundreds of goblins in its time. When the fair elves of Gondolin hunted them in the hills, or did battle before their walls, they had called it Christ, goblin clever, but the goblins called it simply bitter. They hated it, and hated worse anyone that carried it. Murderers and elf friends, said the great goblin. Slash them, beat them, bite them, gnash them. Take them to dark holes full of snakes, and never let them see the light again. He was in such rage that he jumped off his seat and himself rushed at Thorin with his mouth open. Just at the moment, all the lights in the cavern went out, and the great fire went off, poof, into a tower of blue glowing smoke, right up to the roof, that scattered piercing white sparks all among the goblins. The yells and yammering, croaking, gibbering and jabbering, howls, growls, and curses, shrieking and shrieking, that followed were beyond description. Several hundred wild cats and wolves being roasted slowly alive together would not have compared with it. The sparks were burning holes in the goblins, and the smoke that now fell from the roof made the air thick for even their eyes to see through. Soon they were falling over one another and rolling in heaps on the floor, biting and kicking and fighting as if they had all gone mad. Suddenly a sword flashed in its own light. Bilbo saw it go right through the great goblin as he stood dumbfounded in the middle of his rage. He fell dead, and the goblin soldiers fled before the sword, shrieking into the darkness. The sword went back into its sheath. "Follow me, quick," said a voice fierce and quiet. And before Bilbo understood what had happened, he was trotting along again, as fast as he could trot, at the end of the line, down more dark passages, with yells of Goblin Hall growing fainter behind him. A pale light was leading them on. "Quicker, quicker," said the voice. "The torches will soon be relit." "Half a minute," said Dori, who was at the back next to Bilbo, and a decent fellow. He made the hobbit scramble on his shoulders, and as best he could with his tied hands, and then off they all went at a run, with a clink of chains, and many a stumble, since they had no hands to steady themselves with. Not for a long while did they stop, and by that time they must have been right down in the very mountain's heart. Then Gandalf lit up his wand. Of course it was Gandalf, but just then they were too busy to ask how he got there. He took out his sword again, and again it flashed in the dark by itself. It burned with rage and made it gleam if goblins It burned with a rage that made it gleam if goblins were about. Now it was bright as blue flame for delight in the killing of the great lord of the cave. It made no trouble whatever of cutting through the goblin chains and setting all the prisoners free as quickly as possible. The sword's name was Glamdring the Fallhammer, if you remember. The goblins just call it Beater, and hated it worse than Biter, if possible. Orcrist, too, had been saved, for Gandalf had brought it along as well, snatching it from one of the terrified guards. Gandalf thought of most things, and thought he could not do everything. And though he could not do everything, he could do a great deal for friends in a tight corner. "Are we all here?" said he, handing his sword back to Thorin with a bow. "Let me see. 1, that's Thorin. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Where's Feely and Keely?" "Here we are. 12, 13, and here's Mr. Baggins, 14. Well, well, it might be worse, and then again it might be a good deal better. No ponies and no food, and no knowing quite where we are. And hordes of angry goblins just behind. On we go." On they went. Gandalf was quite right. They began to hear goblin noises and horrible cries far behind in the passages they had come through. That sent them on faster than ever, and as poor Bilbo could not possibly go half as fast, for dwarves can roll along at tremendous pace, I can tell you, when they have to. They took it in turn to carry him on their backs. Still, goblins go faster than dwarves, and these goblins knew the way better. They had made the paths themselves, and were madly angry, so that do what they could, the dwarves heard the cries and howls getting closer and closer. Soon they could hear even the flap of the goblins' feet. Many feet, which seemed only just round the last corner. The blink of red torches could be seen behind them in the tunnel they were following, and they were getting deadly tired. "Why, oh why, did I ever leave my hobbit hole?" said poor Bilbo Baggins, bumping up and down on Bomber's back. "Why, oh why, did I ever bring a wretched little hobbit on a treasure hunt?" said poor Bomber, who was fat and staggering along with a sweat dripping down his nose in his heat and terror. At this point, Gandalf fell behind, and Thorin with him. They turned a sharp corner. "About turn," he shouted. "Draw your sword, Thorin." There was nothing else to be done, and the goblins did not like it. They came scurrying round the corner in full cry, and found Goblin Clever and Foe Hammer shining cold and bright, right in their astonished eyes. The ones in front dropped their torches and gave one yell before they were killed. The ones behind yelled still more and leapt back, knocking over those that were running after them. Bitter and beater, they shrieked, and soon they were all in confusion, and most of them were hustling back the way they had come. It was quite a long while before any of them dared to turn that corner. By the time the dwarves had gone on again, a long, long way, on into the dark tunnels of the goblins' realm, when the goblins discovered that they put on their torches and they slipped on soft shoes, and they chose out their very quickest runners, with the sharpest ears and eyes. These ran forward, as swift as weasels in the dark, with hardly any more noise than bats. That is why neither Bilbo nor the dwarves, nor even Gandalf, heard them coming, nor did they see them, but they were seen by the goblins that ran silently up behind, for Gandalf was letting his wand give out a faint light to help the dwarves as they went along. Quite suddenly, Dory, now at the back again, carrying Bilbo, was grabbed from behind in the dark. He shouted and fell. The hobbit rolled off his shoulders into the blackness, bumped his head on a hard rock, and remembered nothing more.
Hey everybody, speaking of queer lodgings, those are churchyard bees. They're busy making honey. Way to go, beekeepers. We're happy for the beekeepers. Thank you, Naomi. Thank you, Kate, for that incredible reading of Queer Lodgings. We'll look forward to next week's reading when we'll hear about flies and spiders. Terrible. But anyway, with all that in mind, I just want to again thank all of you for tuning in. We're so proud of this project and how many of you have been taking this in and experiencing this wonderful reading by these wonderful young people. And we look forward to seeing you all back here next week. And I hope you're safe and well wherever you are, whatever piece of the misty mountain you might be living in right now. Wash your hands, keep a safe distance, look after one another, and remember to tell the people that are in your life that you love them, because it's good to have people in your life, just like Bilbo had some friends in his life. So hold on to that and come back and see us Friday nights with Bilbo Baggins, 7 p.m. St. Aidan's YouTube channel every week. Bring your friends. Ciao for now.